In today's video, I'm going to talk about my premature baby and our NICU journey. We stayed in the NICU for 3 months, which is quite a long time. So we had plenty of ups and downs, and a lot of things happened, which I really enjoy talking about and share with other people, because I know how hard it can be to have a child in the NICU, how the NICU journey can impact parents, especially like us who are first-time parents. So I hope you will enjoy it, and if you have any questions or comments, please write them down below. I would love to hear from you. Or if you have a baby in the NICU or had a similar journey, I think that people who share their stories about the NICU can always connect with each other, because you know, who else can understand you besides other people, other families who gone through the same thing. So I was admitted to a hospital with PDA, which is premature ruptures of membranes. It's literally your water breaks and it all coming out. I had my membranes ruptured at 24 weeks and 4 days, and I was admitted to a hospital. I was in the hospital for a month. There is a full video that I'm talking about it on my channel. You are welcome to go and watch it. I hope you will get all the information from there. It's very detailed. My baby was born at 30 weeks and 3 days on December 10th, 2021. She was born approximately 1.6 kilo, which is 1 kilo 594 grams, which is approximately 3.5 pounds. She was very small, although when they gave her to me, I said, oh my goodness, she's not that small. I didn't feel her as tiny, because I was expecting very tiny baby, and I wouldn't say she was as tiny as I thought she's gonna be. Me, myself, I was born 1.6 kilo almost 40 years ago, so I imagined that it wasn't as tiny as I thought. My mom always says, like, you were small, but not like tiny. Anyways, so the thing with PDA is that the baby continues to develop like very little or even without any amniotic fluid, which can impact the development of their lungs. So my baby was born with normal size lungs, but they obviously weren't developed as a regular 30-week baby. At first, when she was born, she cried, which surprised me and surprised a little bit even the doctors. But after about 10 minutes, they noticed that she has more difficulty to breathe, and her oxygen levels started to drop. It was pretty intense because on the discharge letter that I was reading after we came back from the hospital, it looked like they tried to give her some medication and support, and nothing worked at the beginning. So her oxygen levels were dropping even lower and lower, and all their attempts to help her didn't work at the beginning. Obviously, they have all this medical terminology that I don't understand, so I'm not going to share it. I don't think anybody really can understand what it says, but in general, it took them several minutes to actually help her stabilize her oxygen levels. They put wires into her belly button, and they connected and they intubated her to help her breathe. At first, they thought they will not have to do it, but eventually they had to intubate her. So after stabilizing the baby, they took her to the NICU. My husband went to the NICU with them, so all I had is a couple of seconds that I held her on me right after birth. And the next morning I went to see her for the first time, and I had so many emotions going through my head, and seeing her so small with all the wires and all the breathing supports and the machines around her beeping everywhere. She was sedated, of course, because they said it's pretty uncomfortable to have this tube in your throat, so they said sedate them so they don't feel as uncomfortable. So she was sleeping most of the time, barely opened her eyes. It was really rare that she was even opening a little bit her eyes. I assume she was also too small to do that. They allowed us to touch her a little bit through those round small windows of the incubator. So I touched her a little bit, and I tried to talk to her, saying that mommy is here and everything is gonna be fine. At any point at the beginning, I haven't felt that she is in any danger or there's some, I don't know, risk to her life. From the beginning, I felt that she's strong and everything is gonna be fine, and she will get out of the hospital as soon as possible. Like I was really positive. I wasn't even emotional in a sad way after seeing the baby, because I met other women in the hospital, and some of them, it was really hard for them to handle even looking at their babies in this condition. For me, it wasn't. I knew that I'm gonna go to labor earlier. I didn't know exactly when. Of course, when it happened at 24 weeks, I was really scared because there's a big difference between 24 and 30 weeks. So when I got to 30 weeks, emotionally and mentally, I was ready to give birth. I said, if it's gonna happen right now, I'm okay with that, because I knew that the survival chances are much higher and the risk that there will be any complications with the baby is lower than on 24 weeks. So I guess me preparing myself mentally helped me to cope with the situation as is. After 4 days that Ariel was intubated, they extubated her because they saw that her oxygen levels are very good and she's actually breathing a little bit by herself. So they extubated her and changed it to CPAP machine, which on her tiny face, the CPAP was almost covering her whole face, which was really funny. But I hated the CPAP machine because it was the pressure was sometimes going down naturally somehow, and the machine was always beeping, and the CPAP machine, the beep of the CPAP machine can literally drive you crazy. And I was staying in a hospital 24 hours. I mean, I slept in the hospital. The most amazing thing about being in this hospital is that you have your own room, huge room, then you have a couch that you can sleep on, and a TV and a small fridge that you can use. So it's kind of accommodated for the parents to stay with the baby if they like. And I stayed with her every day for those 3 months. I went home maybe once a week just for a few hours to make some food and to prepare I don't know, things that I need, take some clothes. So one more thing is that she had the jaundice, and she had to be treated for jaundice. So she was under this blue light with the funny goggles on her eyes. This one, it took a while. I think over a week she was under this blue light, because maybe because she was premature, it took longer for the treatment to work. But eventually it worked, and they took her off the blue light after a week or so, and her condition got even better and better. At some point they changed her CPAP to kind of a different machine that they put just like a thing in her nose, which is less oxygen support. And she was doing so great that at some point they came to us and said, well, since this hospital is for very acute treatment and for very sick babies, so babies who are not as sick anymore and all they need is just feed and grow, they transfer them to a different hospital, like lower grade hospital. And we were on the transfer list, and they just come to you one day and say, well, pack your things and you are going to a different hospital. In other hospitals, you don't have your own room. It's like one big open floor and many beds. And I think the only thing that you have is like a curtain that you can separate yourself from others, which I wasn't happy about because I really wanted to stay with her during night, because the nurses sometimes they don't have they cannot sit there like without moving the whole time, and sometimes she was crying or I needed to change her diaper, or many other things that I am there to accommodate, and not the nurses are not, they can't do everything like all the time. They have, some of them even have more than one baby to take care of. When the doctor came to do her discharge exam, she was listening to her heart and said that she heard some murmur in her heart, something that called PDA. And PDA is, all babies, they have PDA when they are in the womb. What it means is that they have like an extra vessel that goes around the lungs, from the heart around the lungs, and it's pumping blood. So instead of blood going into the lungs, because the lungs, they don't work before the baby is born. Only when the baby starts to breathe, the lungs start working. So after birth, this vessel is closing and blood starts going into the lungs. After the doctor checked her and diagnosed her with PDA, they left us in the hospital, and we're trying to treat the PDA with medication. We had 3 rounds with Tylenol. Well, before Tylenol, they tried to give her ibuprofen, and after her second dose of ibuprofen, she had some blood in her stool. They immediately stopped her feeding. She was feeding from a tube because she was too small to eat. So in order for her to feed, they inserted a feeding tube through her mouth at first, and then they changed it to her nose, so it will be more comfortable, and we'll try to give her oral feeding in the future. And they give her IV. So let me tell you, the IV procedure is probably the worst thing that you actually witness that your baby is going through, at least in my opinion, because she's so tiny and it's so hard to find good veins to actually, like for us, like they look for the veins and maybe 1 or 2 attempts and the IV is in. In babies, it can be way more complicated. And what's happening also, if they put the IV, so babies, they move all the time, and very often the IV just come out and they have to redo the thing. They gave us the option to do PICC line, which is more permanent IV that they insert from a vein in the hand, and it goes all the way close to the heart. So when they told me about this PICC line, I was terrified. I said, like, no way I'm doing it to my baby. I'm not doing anything invasive, especially nothing that goes close to the heart. And I said, like, if everything is okay, like with the blood and it all resolves itself, which that's how it looked like, because she didn't show any signs of distress. We are not okay with putting the PICC line. But still, the procedure of looking for the veins and actually putting IV is horrible, because they poke her everywhere. She's screaming like crazy, she's crying, and it's something that is so hard to handle. One time they did it and they had to put it in her head because they literally couldn't find a vein. They said that if they use the vein, and for example, even they use it and it didn't work, so this vein is, they cannot try again on the same vein because something, it just shrinks, or I don't know what's happening. So they tried the legs, the feet, the arms, and they ended up putting IV in her head, and they had to shave. So she had a NICU haircut for a while. And let me tell you, this we had a few more stressful and horrible experiences, but this was the first one that was really hard on me. Another thing that we never witnessed, but only by the description of the procedure, we were a little bit horrified. There's a special doctor who comes and performs this exam, which I'm gonna tell you about, and it's horrible. So what they actually do is that they put eye drops so their eyes will dilate, and then the test itself is it's like no more than 5 minutes, but still they put kind of some device to open their eyes, and then they have another thing, another like metal thing that they move the eyeball from side to side. So I don't know, it sounds horrible. And I asked the nurse, is there a like more humane way to do this test? And she said, believe me, this is the humane way to do the test. So we left and we came back after the exam was done, and Ariel was absolutely fine. She was sleeping. We just saw like some marks on her, around her eyes, probably from the device that holds her eye open, but it was fine. She wasn't traumatized by it. So overall, everything was okay. They tried to treat the PDA. They said it is getting smaller. They were checking her brain from time to time with the ultrasound, saying like, oh, the hemorrhage almost disappeared. She was already on room air, which means that she has the CPAP, but it helps her very little. Soon enough she's going to be off CPAP and try to see if she can breathe on her own, which after a few weeks we tried, and she actually was strong enough to breathe on her own. The only thing we started to notice is that she has a little bit more difficulty to eat. So she wouldn't eat orally as much as a baby her size and her age should. So they couldn't take the tube out, the feeding tube out. They had to pump milk into her, although we started oral feeding, but she just couldn't eat as much. I tried to breastfeed, and it was for me a traumatic and horrible experience. I assume because she was too small at the beginning and I didn't start breastfeeding right away, I was doing pumping and I had a lot of trouble with my milk. I'm not gonna expand on it right now. If it's something that people will be interested, I will talk about what's happening when you have a preemie baby and your milk is coming out, but you cannot pump it effectively. And my journey with my milk supply was another roller coaster that I can say for another video. But when we try to breastfeed, she also doesn't really know what to do, and it just didn't work out. Although I really wanted to breastfeed, but it was a challenge. So she was a little bit too small to take bottle yet, but we tried, and she will eat very, very, very little. At some point, her belly started to distend, well, kind of grow bigger. And at first we didn't pay too much attention to it. Said like, okay, like she's a baby, she has gas. Some of them, especially breast milk fed babies, they don't poop as often as formula fed baby. And they did some x-rays at the beginning and everything looked fine. They saw that she has stool in her bowels, but said it will come out. After a while, we noticed that her belly is getting more like bigger and bigger, and they did an x-ray and saw that she has a lot of air in her bowels, in her intestines. I have a lot of problem to pronounce this word. Intestines. Anyways, you understand, in her bowels. And they didn't see it very concerning at the beginning. They said like, okay, so she has a lot of gas, most probably just gonna come out and nothing to worry about. So they didn't reduce her feeds or anything. We continued with her feeds as usual. And then one day I go on breakfast and I come back and I see a cart, like a cart with tons of medicine outside of the room, and many nurses. And I know this is not a good sign. Like, why are they over there? So I enter the room and I hear my baby screams her lungs out, and they putting the IV again. And I was shocked. I was like, what's going on? Why are you trying to put IV? So apparently she threw up some green liquid called bilious emesis. What it means is that she had a blockage in her intestines, and the food, the milk, and anything couldn't go through. This is one of the first signs that something is wrong with the digestive system. So as soon as the nurse saw that's happening, they automatically stopped all feeds again and connected her to IV. So she will get all her fluids and everything she needs through IV. And they ordered an X-ray right away to see what's going on. And a doctor, a surgeon, came to talk to us before they performed any further examinations, and told us, like, when that's happening, that means that there is something going on that we need to check. We cannot see everything on X-ray, so we will have to perform a surgery to determine what's wrong. My husband, he wasn't convinced. He said, listen, I don't see my baby in distress. I understand that the symptom is not a good symptom, but I also look at the symptoms of my baby. She was still a very happy baby. She didn't have any fever. She wasn't in pain. She was herself. Like, nothing looked out of ordinary with her behavior. So he said, based on that symptom alone, I don't agree for a surgery. She was 2.5 months old, and for such a small baby to go through even anesthesia, it's a big risk, because her body is too small, and we weren't willing to take we weren't willing to deal with this and agree for a surgery and put her under risk. So we asked them to give us a week, see that things are deteriorating or that her well-being is compromised, then obviously we will agree to do a surgery. So, by the way, it happened before she had the green liquid. I'm sorry, it happened when we just saw that her belly has lots of air, and it was there for a while. So the surgical team was consulted, and they said we will need to open her belly and see what's going on, why she has so much air inside. So and then they performed another test, which they give her orally some dye, like a black dye that she swallows, and then they do an X-ray every an hour and a half or 2 hours to see how the liquid is going through her digestive system. And after performing this test, they saw that it's actually going through, that there is no blockage. So we were so happy. We were extremely happy, and we knew that things will gonna resolve themselves, even though the surgical team insisted on surgery. But after this test was performed, we kind of had more, we were kind of sure that it's gonna resolve itself. But then, as I said, one day she threw up this green liquid, and that was a really bad sign. So when that happened, the next morning, a surgeon came, like more senior surgeon came, and he told us, listen, this is a bad sign, and based on her previous x-rays that we kind of combined all together, we see that her state is worsened, and it can be fatal. We have to perform a surgery, because if she has a condition that's called volvulus. So volvulus is when a loop of the intestines twists around itself. So yeah, so that's what's happening, and if you don't treat it right away, the intestines starts to die because there's no blood flow going through. In extreme cases, it can cause death, because obviously when you don't have any blood flow through your digestive system and it starts dying, then the person dies. What is interesting is that this condition has nothing to do with her prematurity. It's something that can happen to any child, even full-term babies, until they 1 year old. So of course my husband came in, and it looked like on the way he already accepted the faith and that we have to do the surgery. There's nothing we can do. We cannot go around it. We will have to deal with it. Of course, we agreed to the surgery because we want our baby to get better. The surgery was scheduled on the same day in a few hours, so we had a little bit of time to process the news, and we tried to hug her and kiss her as much as we could before she going to the surgery. When they took her, they prepared everything and they took her on a different bed down to the surgery room. I was so emotional because you don't know what's going to happen, and at some, I don't know, in some part of my brain I was thinking, what if this is the last time I'm going to see my baby? What if she's going under anesthesia and she's not going to wake up, or something will go wrong in the surgery and something going to happen to her and she's just not going to come back? I just couldn't calm my thoughts down. I couldn't be absolutely positive because it's terrified me, just the thought of that I can actually lose my baby. It took a little bit longer than we expected. So because the doctor told us about 2.5 hours, and it's been like more closer to 3.5 hours, and we haven't heard back, and the nurse haven't heard anything from the surgical team, so we were a little bit worried. But eventually they brought her up and the surgery was over. The doctor came talk to us, and he said that everything went absolutely fine, and she is a hero and such a strong baby, and everything is like, he fixed everything. So he said it wasn't in a critical condition, but if we were to wait a few more days or even like a week, it could have been pretty dangerous. The worst time of our stay in the NICU was actually after the surgery, because Ariel was intubated again, but this time she was bigger, and they didn't sedate her as much, because if you give her a lot of sedation, then the recovery is going to be much longer. And looking at her going through this whole intubation thing was really, really hard. First of all, when she came back from the surgery, we couldn't really recognize her because she was so swollen. We don't really have pictures after the surgery because we really didn't want to remind ourselves of this period ever again. I do have those pictures in my mind, but it's not something that I ever want to look at and remember. She was swollen, absolutely swollen. I said, like, it's not how I remember my baby went to the surgery a few hours ago. She had a lot of bruises because they tried to find veins again for the intubation, for the IV, and everything was so red, and she had all those blood marks, and she also had like a huge bruise on her neck because they put another, like, more needles in her neck. It was horrible. Like, I was horrified when I saw her after the surgery. But then after they started to remove the sedation and she started to realize what's going on, the tube that she had in her lungs was irritating her to the point that I just was looking at her face, and she was doing this face like she's in so much pain. And after the surgery, and because she had this intubation, she had a lot of secretion that they had to do suction every time, and they would do it only when they see her numbers on the monitor are going down. But us as parents, we were looking at her and always see her like doing this face of like of irritation or pain, and she was crying, but she couldn't really make any noise. It was absolutely heartbreaking. I was so upset, so upset. I would call the nurse all the time and ask her to do this vacuum to take all the secretion out, because the baby, she's literally was suffering. She was in so much discomfort that I couldn't handle it. They took their time with the extubation, because they said like they prefer to wait a little bit longer than to extubate her, and then realized that she still needs help, and to intubate her in these conditions, I mean, that she's awake and everything, it's even more traumatic than just have the tube in. So we had to agree to that, and to give it a few more days. So she was intubated 4 or 5 days in total, which was horrible. At this period, I didn't stay in the hospital overnight because I couldn't hold her, I couldn't help her. It would be just too stressful for me to watch her suffering as much and not doing anything about it. I mean, I couldn't do anything about it. So I slept at home. This were the only days that I slept at home, but I was calling in the middle of the night to talk to the nurse and see how Ariel is doing. And then first thing in the morning, we were coming to the hospital and sitting with her, talking again to make sure that she's gonna be extubated as soon as possible. Obviously, eventually she was extubated and switched to a CPAP. At this point, we felt that this is the last challenge in the NICU, and gradually we resumed feeds. We started to feed her from a bottle. At first, of course, it took her time to go back to eat, and it took us time to go back to full feed. In the hospital, they couldn't discharge us home unless they know that she can tolerate full feed. So we stayed another 2 weeks. Eventually, she got to a good enough feeds. So they released us home on March 8th. And although we were a little bit worried of how things are gonna be at home, but things went so well, and she started to eat so well and sleep very well. So this is basically our NICU story. I wanted to share the main events that happened during these 3 months. But overall, our NICU experience was very positive, and it prepared us for parenthood and gave us so much confidence, and we learned so much during our 3-month stay that we are really, really grateful for how things went and how things turned out. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you have any comments or suggestions or your own stories, you are welcome to comment down below, and I'll see you in the next video.